1. A royal perspective. Zyra, the princess of the Andril Empire, gazed out across the planet's surface from the observation deck of her ship. Earth, as the humans called it, was a beautiful world, green oceans, vast continents, and sprawling cities. But to Zyra, it seemed rather primitive. The inhabitants of this planet, with their short lifespans, primitive technology, and inefficient biology, could hardly compare to the Andril race. Her people were the epitome of biological and technological excellence. They were strong, they were smart, and they had conquered the stars long before humans had even discovered fire. But, despite her superior intellect and strength, Zyra had come to Earth at the behest of her father, the Emperor of Andril. Earth was strategically important, and a diplomatic mission was essential to secure trade agreements and alliances. Yet, as she sat on the high-tech command chair, she felt more disdain for this planet than intrigue. Her sleek black and silver armor shimmered in the ambient light, reflecting her regal status as the princess. Zyra's features were sharp, her golden eyes glowing with an internal fire that could have reduced an entire city to ash. Her alien skin was a deep violet hue, her hair flowing in strands of bioluminescent silver, making her a sight of otherworldly beauty. She had everything that made the Andril Empire great: power, grace, and the unshakable belief in her species' superiority. "Princess, we are nearing Earth's atmosphere," the captain's voice crackled over the comms, bringing Zyra out of her thoughts. "The humans have prepared a reception for you at the royal embassy. Should I prepare your landing sequence?" Zyra didn't respond immediately, instead staring at Earth with an expression of cold judgment. She had read all about humans, their biological systems, their social structures, and their flawed attempts to master space travel. They were a curious species to be sure, but ultimately unremarkable. Their most significant achievement, as far as Zyra was concerned, was their ability to breed at an alarming rate, an inefficient process that spoke to their primitive nature. As her ship descended into Earth's atmosphere, Zyra's mind wandered to the humans' strange obsession with reproduction. The Andril species was far more efficient in terms of procreation. They did not rely on the flawed biological process of conception, gestation, and birth. Their reproduction was a perfect blend of science and nature, using their advanced technology to grow new life without the messy complications of human biology. They created life through genetics alone, ensuring that every new being was superior in every way. Her thoughts were interrupted as the ship touched down. The loud hum of the landing thrusters died down, and the sleek silver craft settled gracefully onto the Earth's soil. Zyra stood, her long violet robes flowing around her, and walked toward the exit. As she emerged, a small crowd of humans gathered, their faces filled with awe and curiosity. Their clothing was far simpler than hers, unadorned and lacking in sophistication. They looked up at her with wide eyes, murmuring in disbelief. Princess Zyra, one of the humans, stepped forward, offering his hand in greeting. "It is an honor to welcome you to our world." Zyra regarded him coldly, her eyes scanning the man's primitive attire. He wore a simple suit of fabric, no visible technology or enhancements. His skin was a pale tone, eyes a dull brown. She could not help but notice the weakness in his posture, the way his body seemed fragile compared to her own. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "But I trust you have a fascinating explanation for your species' continued survival despite your primitive biology." The man blinked, caught off guard by the princess's bluntness, but he recovered quickly. "I believe you'll find that humanity has a lot more to offer than meets the eye. We may not have advanced as quickly as your people, but we are incredibly resourceful. And our biology, well, it's part of what makes us special." Zyra arched an eyebrow. "Special? Please enlighten me." The man's face brightened. "Well, our reproduction process, for example." Zyra cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm aware of your reproductive process. It's a fascinatingly inefficient system of conception, gestation, and birth, isn't it? Hardly impressive, considering how crude it is compared to Andril technology." Her words were met with a silence that seemed to hang in the air like an unspoken challenge. The human's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Yes, we still rely on natural reproduction. It's part of what makes us human," he said, his voice calm but tinged with defensiveness. "But you'll see soon enough. Our biology has its own unique wonders." Zyra's curiosity was piqued, though she didn't show it outwardly. She had heard the same speech from every human she'd met so far, but there was something about the way this man spoke that made her reconsider her assumptions. Maybe it was the way his eyes gleamed with a sense of pride, despite his species' seemingly backwards biology. Very well, she said, her voice laced with quiet amusement. Show me this miracle of human reproduction. Perhaps I'll see what makes your species so special after all. The man smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. We'd be happy to, Princess. Follow me. We have a place where you can learn about it firsthand. Zyra followed him, still skeptical but intrigued. She was about to witness human reproduction in a way no alien had ever seen before. And while she believed it to be a primitive and inefficient process, she couldn't help but wonder, what could possibly be so remarkable about it? The introduction to human reproduction. Zyra walked through the human facility, her regal footsteps echoing in the sterile, high-tech corridors. She kept her expression impassive, her golden eyes scanning everything around her with a clinical detachment. Despite her outward calm, there was a sense of unease swirling within her. It was one thing to observe human biology from a distance, but to be here, so close to their strange reproductive systems, felt entirely different. As an andril, Zyra had never had to question her species' methods of procreation. It was all managed with precision and technology, from genetic engineering to incubation pods that housed the future generations of her people. Everything was flawless. Everything was perfect. But this was messy. The human guide led her into a spacious room filled with monitors, tables, and various tools. There were no signs of the streamlined, clinically organized technology she was used to. Instead, there was an almost organic feel to everything, as if the entire process relied on chance and timing more than control. Her eyes flicked over to a large screen, where a human woman lay on a bed, connected to various devices. A glowing monitor next to her displayed vital signs, and Zyra saw a clear image of the developing fetus inside the woman's womb. Here, Princess, you can see how human conception works, the guide, Dr. Marcus West, explained. His voice was calm, but Zyra could sense the pride he held for his species. In humans, reproduction is a natural process, driven by complex hormonal signals and biological cycles. We've developed a deep understanding of it over the years, though it remains a delicate balance. Zyra didn't respond immediately. She stepped closer to the screen, her gaze fixed on the developing fetus. It looked so fragile, so small, suspended in a liquid-filled sac. She was used to seeing beings being grown and created in precise, sterile environments, with every gene and cell monitored and perfected. This seemed like an inefficient mess of trial and error. You see, Dr. Marcus continued, humans need to rely on a series of events to come together at the right time. It's not immediate like the perfect genetic manipulation of your people, but it works, somehow. This is a mother pregnant with her first child. The fertilized egg was implanted after conception, but we still monitor everything closely. Zyra's gaze shifted to the woman on the bed. She had heard that humans often risked complications in their reproductive process, and this woman appeared to be no different. She seemed vulnerable, helpless in comparison to the flawless processes of her own species. She took a deep breath, her posture not betraying her thoughts. So, this is how humans reproduce? By chance? Not exactly, Dr. Marcus replied. There's still a lot of science behind it. We monitor every step, from fertilization to early development. But yes, there's a degree of uncertainty involved. And while the process may seem inefficient, the results are truly miraculous. Zyra couldn't help but roll her eyes slightly, but she quickly masked it with a more neutral expression. Miraculous? I fail to see how human reproduction can be anything but inefficient. You rely on pure biological happenstance, relying on mating rituals and genetic combination. And this process, this is what you call a miracle? The guide didn't falter. There's beauty in how it works, Princess. There's beauty in the way humans are able to create life from the smallest of beginnings, from something as simple as an egg and sperm. And then, despite all the odds, they carry that life to full term. Zyra raised an eyebrow. You speak as if there's some higher purpose in the chaos of human reproduction. But no matter how much you romanticize it, this is no different from an animal's mating process. What's the point of all this? I still don't understand. You might not fully understand it yet, Dr. Marcus said, his tone firm but patient. But humans, we don't just create life. We nurture it. Our bonds are built through this process. It's not perfect, but it's what makes us human. Zyra's expression softened for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her cold, regal composure. She wasn't about to let this human see that she was even slightly intrigued. Fine, she replied curtly. What else? Dr. Marcus gestured toward a nearby screen. Well, here we have another example. This one shows in vitro fertilization or IVF. It's a process where human embryos are created outside the body, then implanted into a woman's womb. It allows humans to overcome many of the barriers in natural conception. Zyra watched as the process unfolded on the screen. A clear image of human embryos, developed in a laboratory, floated in a glass container. The embryos looked eerily perfect, tiny beings with delicate limbs, all displayed in microscopic detail. Zyra didn't show it, but the sight was oddly fascinating. For all the chaos and inefficiency that seemed inherent in the process, these embryos looked fragile and yet filled with potential. There was something undeniably beautiful about the way these small life forms struggled to survive, to grow. "And you do this artificially?" Zyra asked, her voice betraying a small trace of disbelief. "You forced this to happen?" "Yes," Dr. Marcus said. "But it's not as unnatural as you might think. IVF simply accelerates the process by helping the egg meet the sperm in a controlled environment. Once the embryo is created, it's as natural as any other conception. We only help guide the process." Zyra stood there, staring at the screen, lost in thought. The initial scorn she had felt toward humanity's reproductive process was beginning to erode, replaced by a strange sense of curiosity. She had seen many different species in her travels, each with its own methods of reproduction, but none of them had displayed this much care for nurturing the life that they brought into existence. Despite the messiness of it all, humans showed a kind of devotion to their offspring that, in a way, even the andril species lacked. "What you say is true," Zyra finally murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "But there is still much inefficiency." Dr. Marcus smiled. "Maybe. But as I said, it works. Life emerges, and despite everything, it's incredibly powerful." Zyra was silent for a long moment, reflecting on the human's words. A deep part of her began to wonder if there was something more to this process than she had initially realized. But she was no closer to truly understanding it. She couldn't reconcile the inefficiency and chaos of human reproduction with her deeply ingrained belief in the perfection of andril biology. "Perhaps," she said, breaking the silence, "there is more to human life than I thought. But don't expect me to get overly sentimental about it." Dr. Marcus chuckled. "Fair enough, Princess. But I think you'll begin to see that there's magic in the way life is created here on Earth." Zyra didn't respond. She only turned her gaze to the screen again, where the developing fetus floated in its sac, fragile, delicate, but filled with the promise of something far greater than she had initially assumed. For the first time, Zyra felt a flicker of curiosity. A spark of something she couldn't quite define. Zyra's first shock. Zyra stood in silence, the hum of machinery in the background as her eyes remained locked on the screen displaying the developing fetus. The sterile room felt suddenly smaller, almost oppressive in its quiet stillness. Her mind, usually so sharp and calculated, struggled to make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling within her. She had come to Earth with the firm belief that human biology was weak, that their method of reproduction, primitive and fraught with inefficiency, was inferior. Yet here she was watching a life unfold in real time, and something deep inside her stirred. Dr. Marcus stood beside her, observing her carefully, but Zyra's mind was elsewhere. The human world seemed so fragile compared to the Andril Empire, so young and unpredictable. Yet, as she studied the image of the fetus, growing inside a human womb, there was an undeniable strength in the way it persisted. The human body, despite its fragility, carried life in a way that was almost resilient. The human guide noticed her gaze and took a small step closer. "Princess Zyra, I can see you're processing a lot. It's not easy to understand at first. The way humans reproduce is so different from the precision of your race." Zyra's golden eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't respond. Her mind was still grappling with the raw, organic reality of what she was witnessing. There was something unexplainable, something she couldn't quite place that made her feel uneasy. But then, the sharp voice of Dr. Marcus brought her back to the present. "If you don't mind, Princess," he said, "I'd like to show you the next stage of the process. It's when the fetus begins to grow rapidly, and the mother undergoes the most significant changes." Zyra nodded, though she was still lost in thought. She followed him as he led her toward another series of monitors. This room was slightly more complex, with larger tanks and medical equipment designed to support the process of a human mother's pregnancy. There were small embryos displayed in jars, growing at an accelerated rate. Zyra's mind raced. She had heard of gestation before, of course. She knew that human females carried their young for 9 months, which, compared to the andril way of reproduction, seemed to take an eternity. The andril method was simple. No gestation, no birth, just perfect growth inside a sterile pod, with every aspect of development monitored. But this was something else. The images of rapid growth on the monitor seemed almost unnatural. How could humans bear the stress of carrying such fragile life forms within them for so long? This is where the real miracle begins, Dr. Marcus explained, pointing to a monitor where the fetus had grown noticeably larger. The cells multiply, the organs develop, and a human life takes shape. It's truly a beautiful process, Princess. Zyra narrowed her eyes as she observed the image before her. The fetus was now clearly human, a tiny being with a head, limbs, and an almost humanoid structure. But the rate at which it grew, it was almost alarming. There was a level of chaos in its development. Unlike the precise and orderly creation of android life, this seemed unpredictable. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp, startled cry from one of the rooms behind them. Zyra whirled around, her heightened senses detecting a sudden rush of energy. A human woman, her face flushed and wrinkled in pain, was being wheeled into the room by several medics. "Princess," Dr. Marcus said urgently, his voice rising slightly. "This is the moment when human life demands attention." Zyra's brows furrowed in confusion as the woman's painful cries filled the air. The medical staff moved swiftly, attending to her. She watched closely, unable to tear her gaze away. The woman was on the bed now, panting heavily as her body went through a series of involuntary convulsions. Her fingers gripped the edges of the bed, and Zyra's keen alien eyes could see every bead of sweat that formed on her brow. "It's time," Dr. Marcus murmured, more to himself than Zyra. "The pain of childbirth, it is, by far, one of the most overwhelming experiences humans can face. But they endure." The woman's screams became more pronounced and Zyra's pulse quickened. She felt something shift deep inside her chest, a sensation she could not quite identify. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't right. She had seen countless species, countless forms of life, but nothing had ever prepared her for the raw, human display of vulnerability before her. The medics continued to work, their hands swift and practiced, but Zyra could see that there was an element of chaos here that seemed beyond control. The woman's pain was visceral, real, like nothing Zyra had ever felt herself. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in her own species. The android had no need for this kind of suffering. Reproduction was a carefully monitored, pain-free process, done with perfect accuracy. Zyra shifted uncomfortably as the woman's pain intensified. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in her life. The discomfort of the human woman echoed in her own mind, and the vulnerability, the weakness, struck her with a force she could not ignore. But then something happened. Despite the intensity of the woman's screams, something miraculous occurred. The woman's eyes softened and her grip on the bed loosened. With a deep, primal cry, a small, crying infant was placed in her arms. The sight of the tiny human child, held in its mother's arms, took Zyra by surprise. The baby, helpless, fragile, was alive. And in that moment, Zyra's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Marcus smiled at her, his expression a mix of pride and reverence. "It's over. This is the miracle of human life. No technology can match the purity of this process. No race, not even the android, can replicate this combination of pain, joy, and love." Zyra remained silent, her golden eyes fixed on the baby. The fragile creature, now wrapped in blankets, was crying as if to announce its entry into the world. The noise echoed in the room, reverberating against the sterile walls. Zyra felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest, an unexpected pang of something she couldn't quite define. For the first time in her life, Zyra felt the weight of a human experience. And as she stood there, staring at the tiny life before her, she realized she could never truly understand the beauty of it until she had seen it for herself. The way that the pain and joy of human reproduction was wrapped into a single, breathtaking moment. This was something beyond her comprehension. But there was one thing she knew for certain now: human life, despite all its inefficiency, was far more miraculous than she had ever imagined. The transformation. Zyra's eyes lingered on the tiny human child as it rested in its mother's arms. She could not look away, transfixed by the softness of its fragile form. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, a simple rhythm that spoke volumes about the preciousness of life. The mother, though exhausted and drenched in sweat, smiled down at her newborn. There was an almost otherworldly glow about her, a sense of wonder and fulfillment that made Zyra feel something she couldn't quite identify. "Humans," Zyra muttered under her breath, barely audible. "So fragile. Yet they endure." The room had grown quiet, save for the soft coos of the infant. Dr. Marcus, sensing Zyra's transformation, carefully stepped closer. "Princess," he said softly, "I know this has been overwhelming, but I think you're beginning to understand something about humans that not many outside of our species can grasp. Zyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the mother and child. She could feel her mind racing, piecing together everything she had seen and heard. There was something about human life that seemed to possess a quiet power. The pain of childbirth, the vulnerability, the rawness of the process, it all led to this moment. And despite the chaos, the uncertainties, and the inefficiencies of it all, there was undeniable beauty in it. The baby let out a small cry, and Zyra instinctively took a step back, as though the sound had startled her. It wasn't just the noise. It was the sheer force of it, the tiny infant, so small, yet so demanding. Humans brought life into the world through such a primitive and emotional process. It was like a dance, unpredictable yet deliberate, chaotic yet full of intention. There was no way to control it, but somehow it always worked. "I can see you're processing it all," Dr. Marcus said gently. "For most species, reproduction is a sterile process, a means to an end. But for humans it's so much more. It's a transformation. It's a bond. We experience every moment, every drop of pain, every moment of joy, as if we're being reborn with each child. It's not just biology, princess. It's an emotional journey. One that transforms us into something more than we were before." Zyra felt a surge of unfamiliar emotion. Her android heart, accustomed to logic and detachment, couldn't comprehend the weight of Dr. Marcus's words. She had spent centuries in her own world, learning, adapting, controlling everything to perfection. But here, among humans, there was a chaos that couldn't be tamed. And yet, it still resulted in life. It was a strange, perplexing paradox that she couldn't ignore. "You speak of transformation," Zyra replied slowly, her voice distant, "but I see nothing but weakness. The pain, the vulnerability, it all seems so beneath us." Dr. Marcus met her gaze with a soft smile. "It's true that pain is part of the process, princess. But it's the transformation that makes it worthwhile. Every birth is a rebirth. Humans are born again each time they bring life into this world. We don't just create life, we create bonds that transcend the biological." Zyra turned her attention back to the mother and child, her mind still wrestling with the concept. She had never considered the emotional aspect of reproduction before. Her species had no need for such emotional connections. They were purely logical beings, created and nurtured for a specific purpose. But humans seemed to thrive on their connections. Their bonds were what made them strong, even in the face of such pain and uncertainty. The infant in the mother's arms reached out with tiny hands, grasping at the air as if already searching for the comfort of the world outside. The mother instinctively adjusted her hold, her face lighting up with an expression of pure adoration as she cradled her child closer. Zyra watched with a mixture of awe and disbelief. How could something so fragile evoke such powerful emotions? How could something so small, so helpless, command so much love and devotion? "I don't understand," Zyra confessed quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "How can something so delicate be so powerful?" Dr. Marcus looked at her with a deep understanding in his eyes. "You see it now, don't you? The true miracle isn't in the reproductive process itself. It's in the way human life transforms us. In the way it brings us closer, in the way it gives us purpose." Zyra felt an unfamiliar tightening in her chest. She could feel the gravity of his words, but it was more than that. There was something about this moment, about this fragile human life, that awakened something deep within her. She had always believed that strength came from control, from perfection. But this felt different. She felt something stir within her that she had never allowed herself to feel before, a yearning to understand, to experience, to truly connect. The mother, still cradling her child, suddenly looked up at Zyra, her tired eyes meeting the princess's gaze. There was something in those eyes, something almost intangible. It was an invitation, a silent understanding that transcended language. Zyra's heart skipped a beat, her golden eyes softening as the human woman offered her a small smile. "Would you like to hold him?" the woman asked, her voice gentle but filled with warmth. Zyra was taken aback. Hold the child? She had never held a baby before. Her species didn't allow for such attachments. To touch something so delicate, something so vulnerable, was it not beneath her? She had never felt such uncertainty before. But before she could form an answer, Dr. Marcus stepped forward. "It's a human tradition," he explained. "To hold the newborn is to acknowledge the beauty of life. To share in the bond that is formed the moment the child enters this world." Zyra hesitated for a moment longer, her golden eyes flickering between the child and the mother. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she extended her arms cautiously. The mother, with a tender smile, gently placed the infant in Zyra's arms. The moment their hands touched, Zyra felt a spark, a connection that defied explanation. The warmth of the baby's body, the softness of its skin, the way it instinctively curled into her embrace, it was overwhelming. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected to feel this. She hadn't expected the surge of warmth and tenderness to flood her chest. She had been taught to control her emotions, to remain detached. But as the baby squirmed slightly in her arms, looking up at her with wide, curious eyes, she couldn't help but feel something shift inside her. It was as if, in that moment, Zyra was transformed. The child's tiny hand reached up, grasping her finger with an unexpected strength. The gesture was simple, but in it, Zyra felt something profound, something she had never felt before. This was what it meant to be human. The connection. The vulnerability. The raw power of life itself. For the first time, Zyra understood. The unseen power. Zyra stood motionless, the infant's tiny fingers still wrapped around her own, and she felt it, an undeniable pulse, like the beating of a heart that wasn't her own. The child looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, its gaze filled with innocent wonder, and Zyra felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't something she could explain, but it was there, lingering, deep inside her chest. This sensation, this bond, it had the power to shake her to her core. She carefully cradled the baby in her arms, as though it were made of glass, fragile and precious. Despite her natural strength and composure, she couldn't shake the vulnerability she felt. There was something so disarming about holding the life of another in your hands, especially when it was so small, so delicate, so full of promise. She could sense the warmth of the child's body, its heartbeat pulsing against her palm, and she understood in that instant that she had never experienced anything like this in her entire existence. Dr. Marcus, standing beside her, watched her with a knowing gaze. He had seen the transformation in her. This was no longer the confident, stoic alien princess who had come to Earth with a sense of superiority. This was a different Zyra, one who was beginning to see humanity through a new lens. It was one thing to study a species, to observe their customs and biology from a distance, but it was entirely another to experience it firsthand. "I can see it now," Zyra murmured, her voice soft, almost in awe. She looked down at the baby in her arms. "The strength, the power. It's unlike anything I've ever witnessed." Dr. Marcus nodded. "Exactly. Humans may seem weak in comparison to many other species, but there's a depth to them that most don't understand. Their ability to endure, to connect, to form bonds that transcend mere biology, that is the true power of humanity." Zyra's golden eyes shifted back to the mother, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the scene with a tired yet contented smile. She had gone through the pain of childbirth, her body still recovering, but her eyes were filled with a quiet joy, a joy that was shared between her and the newborn in Zyra's arms. The connection between them was undeniable, woven together by something far more powerful than any technology or physical strength. As Zyra stood there holding the child, a new understanding washed over her. She had always believed that the key to true power lay in control, in perfection, in the ability to shape and manipulate the world around her. The Andral Empire had no room for weakness, no room for vulnerability. They had mastered every aspect of their existence from birth to death, and had created a society built on strength and precision. But here in this moment she realized something. True power wasn't always about control. Sometimes, it was about embracing the vulnerability, the unpredictability, and the chaos that came with life itself. It was about the bond that connected individuals, the shared strength of community, and the resilience that carried them through the most difficult moments. And humans, with all their flaws and imperfections, possessed that power in abundance. Zyra felt a deep stirring within her, a shift that she couldn't ignore. She had always seen humans as inferior, their methods of reproduction primitive, their biology flawed. But now she was beginning to see them in a new light. Their strength wasn't in their perfection, it was in their ability to adapt, to grow, and to create life even in the face of adversity. "I never understood it before," Zyra said, her voice almost to herself, "but now I see. You don't need to control everything to be powerful. Sometimes, it's the unknown, the unpredictable, that holds the greatest strength." Dr. Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You're learning, princess. And that's the beauty of it. Humans are never truly weak. We are complex, chaotic, but we find ways to survive, to thrive. It's not about control. It's about the power to live, to love, and to fight for what matters." Zyra gently placed the baby back into its mother's arms, feeling a strange sense of loss as the warmth of the child's body was no longer in her hands. But as she stepped back, she realized something. She had experienced something beyond anything her species could ever have imagined. The connection between mother and child, the love that flowed between them, was a power that no android weapon or technology could ever replicate. Her mind raced as she reflected on the journey she had taken over the past few days. From the moment she had arrived on Earth, she had been determined to prove her superiority. She had come to study humans, to learn about their biology and their ways, but what she hadn't anticipated was the profound lesson they would teach her. Zyra had thought that strength came from domination, from precision, from control. But now she understood that true power came from the ability to embrace the unknown, to endure through pain, and to form bonds that transcended time and space. As she looked at the mother and child, her heart swelled with something she couldn't quite put into words. She had witnessed the miracle of life, seen it in all its raw beauty, and for the first time, Zyra understood why humans revered it. There was a quiet strength in their ability to love, to connect, and to give life, despite the challenges they faced. This wasn't the power of a species that could be conquered with advanced technology or weaponry. No, this was the power of life itself, the most precious and untamable force in the universe. And for the first time in her life, Zyra felt a deep respect for humans. They were not inferior. They were not weak. They were resilient, compassionate, and capable of greatness. She had seen their strength, and now she knew that the universe had much to learn from them. "Thank you," Zyra said, her voice steady but filled with a sincerity she hadn't known she was capable of. "For showing me this power." Dr. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of understanding. "You're welcome, Princess. Now you can carry that knowledge back with you. And I have no doubt that it will change the way you see humanity, and the universe, forever." Zyra stood there for a moment longer, her mind racing with new possibilities. She had come to Earth with a sense of superiority, but now she was leaving with something far more valuable, a newfound understanding of what it meant to be truly powerful. And as she looked at the infant, now peacefully resting in its mother's arms, Zyra knew that this experience would stay with her for the rest of her life. The legacy of life. Zyra stood by the window, the soft glow of Earth's moon casting long shadows across the room. The night was quiet, the hum of the space station a gentle reminder of her presence in this alien world. Yet, despite the calm, her mind raced, caught in the whirlwind of everything she had experienced during her time on Earth. The transformation had been profound. She had come here to study humans, to uncover the weaknesses of a species she had once deemed beneath her, beneath the advanced Andril Empire. Yet now, as she looked back on the days she had spent with them, she found herself facing an entirely new perspective. Zyra had learned more than just the mechanics of human biology, more than the delicate balance between strength and fragility. She had witnessed something far greater, the true essence of humanity, the legacy of life itself. The way the human mother had cradled her child, her face soft with an unspoken love, had struck Zyra in ways she couldn't fully describe. It was not simply the act of nurturing that had captured her attention, but the profound weight of what it meant. The bond between parent and child, so simple and yet so powerful, transcended anything Zyra had ever known. It was in the moments of pain, the moments of joy, and in the sacrifices made in the name of life itself. Zyra's thoughts drifted back to the day when she had first held the child in her arms. The small, delicate life had seemed so fragile, so vulnerable. Yet, as she had looked down into the infant's wide, trusting eyes, she had realized that this tiny being held a strength far greater than her own. The human child, so innocent, yet capable of forming connections that could change the course of entire worlds, held the legacy of humanity's resilience. In the days since that moment, Zyra had begun to understand. Humans were not weak as she had once thought. They were resilient beyond measure. Their true power was not in their physical prowess, nor their ability to control their environment. Their power was in their capacity to love, to connect, and to endure. It was in the way they fought for each other, no matter the cost. It was in the strength they found in vulnerability, the way they could bring forth life from their own pain and suffering, and in the way they cherished it above all else. Zyra's golden eyes glinted with the recognition of a truth she had never considered. This is the greatest power in the universe, she murmured to herself, barely able to comprehend the depth of what she had witnessed. Her gaze shifted to the stars beyond the window, the vast expanse of space stretching out before her. In the silence of the cosmos, she felt something she had never experienced before: humility. It wasn't a sensation she was accustomed to. The Andril Empire had never known such weakness. They were conquerors, rulers, and masters of their own fate. Yet here, on this small blue planet, she had witnessed something that had utterly changed her perception of strength. Dr. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, "It's not about control, princess. It's about the power to live, to love, and to fight for what matters." She had understood the words, but it wasn't until now, as she stood alone in the quiet of the night, that the weight of them truly sank in. There was more to life than the calculated, controlled existence of her people. There was more to the universe than mastery over time and space. Zyra had thought that by holding the reins of power, by making decisions with perfect precision, she had achieved greatness. But now she realized that greatness was not defined by domination. It was defined by the ability to embrace the unpredictable, to love fiercely, and to protect life at all costs. And in the human's legacy, she had found something to aspire to. Her mind drifted to the future. Would the Andril Empire, with all its advanced technology and supreme intellect, ever understand the value of what she had learned here? Would they ever see that the greatest power came not from dominating others, but from connecting with them? Zyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her newfound understanding. It wasn't enough to simply observe humanity anymore. She had to carry this knowledge back with her. The lessons she had learned here could shape the future of her people, of her empire, if only she could make them see the truth she now understood. But she also knew the journey wouldn't be easy. Her people were not quick to embrace change, and the Andril Empire valued power above all else. Yet, Zyra couldn't help but believe that this was the future where life and love, connection and endurance, would define what it truly meant to be strong. With a deep breath, Zyra turned away from the window and walked towards the door, the weight of her decision hanging heavy in the air. She would return to her people, but she would not be the same. The lessons of Earth had transformed her. She had seen the power of humanity's reproductive miracle, the strength born from pain and love, and she could never forget it. She had come to Earth to study humanity's flaws, but now she left with a greater understanding of their greatness. As she made her way toward the transport shuttle that would take her back to the Andril Empire, Zyra's thoughts were filled with the future. She would carry this knowledge, this understanding, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could change the course of her people's destiny. Zyra had always believed that the Andril Empire was the pinnacle of existence. But now, as she prepared to leave Earth, she realized that true greatness had been found not in power, but in the strength to create life, to connect, and to love. And that, she knew, was a power the universe had yet to fully comprehend.